Welcome back to Atlanta. I'm Liam. This is Brandon. Brandon, what an exciting semifinal match that was.
Yeah, no kidding. It went all the way down to game 3. I was on the edge of my seat, to be honest with you.
Yeah, 2 decks that we've seen, all the way since set 1, head-to-head, and gosh, what an exciting finish. We are excited to see Matthew in the finals take this deck, see if he can take it all the way against Joshua. But while we're getting ready to bring that to you, I just wanted to take a moment and say, Brandon, that I had such a great experience casting alongside you today, or this weekend. And with our remote team, with Jonti and Rebekah, and then Tannon here. It's been such an incredible experience getting to spend the weekend with you. And then also, I have to say, to meet everybody who came out here. Over 2,000 Lorcana fans came to this event, playing in events, but I think the best part about this weekend was community. I have been following this game for a year and a half. I know you have as well, Brandon, ever since it was announced, and I've had to explain Lorcana to a lot of people. And when they ask me what the game's about, there's a lot of words that come to mind. One is Disney, one is magical, fun, collectible. But the word that I use the most is community. Because those of us who follow this game, that love this game, we've made new friends, connected through this game, and it's been amazing to watch those moments happen here. People meeting each other for the first time who maybe only know each other through online interactions, sitting across from the table to play a game with somebody as strangers at first and then leaving the table as friends. It sounds cheesy, but that's what's been happening all weekend, and it's just been an incredible experience for me.
No, I totally agree. Like, I've told people even before I showed up here, one of my favorite parts about going to events like this in general is meeting the people that I interact with online every day but don't see. We all share this same love for this Disney card game, and there's something extremely special about being in the same room as all of these other people that you've interacted with and you don't get to see all the time. You get to finally see them and hug them and laugh and talk to each other, and like you said, play Lorcana games. Even if you're playing at the competitive level, you're grinding all day, you're doing your best, and you get to meet up at the very end and have dinner and have such an amazing time. And the amount of people that I saw today and yesterday that were just had a smile on their face, like just having a great time, laughing and joking around. The vibes are immaculate here. Like, I cannot express how much fun this has been for everybody to be in the same place at the same time.
And it's not just about the love of the game that you get to play and the experience of playing the game, but it's about the love for these properties, for these characters, for Disney. The thing about Disney is I think everybody has a memory that they associate with their childhood. There's nostalgia involved with these characters. So when you play a game with characters that you love, it's touching something, from your past. And it connects you with who you were, brings it to the present, and you get to connect with other people over that. And I love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons that I got into this game was because of exactly what you just said. I connected with the IP. I connected with the characters. There were movies and shows that I grew up on. And to be able to connect with other people who also connect in the same way is just, there's something extremely special about that.
Gosh. So, yeah. Anyway, this has been a fantastic weekend for us, fantastic weekend for me, and we want to tell you how we can get you to the next Lorcana Challenge.
Yeah. So next there is Chicago, but unfortunately Chicago is already sold out. There are quite a few people who are interested in going to Chicago. Liam, I know I'm going to be at Chicago. I'm excited to see everybody there. But if you want to be a part of this special occasion, the next opportunity is going to be in Fort Worth on July 20th and 21st. Liam, I know you and myself also plan to be there, and the tickets are almost sold out for that event. I don't think there's very many left, and I promise you, Twitch chat, you want to come to this event. I know it's difficult to communicate this over the internet when you're not actually here, but I hope you guys take our words and believe what we're trying to explain to you here.
You can meet us. You can meet us. And if you don't want to compete, you can get an attendee ticket and compete in some of the side events for prize tickets, etc. And if they're sold out, there's also a wait list, and so you can get on that wait list for any of these events as they sold out. And I know a lot of people who have made it into these events off the wait list, so it's definitely something worth doing.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff that you can do here between the side events and the actual competition. We've shown people the prize wall before, and it's there's lots of goodies there. I'm sure that there will be a lot of really good stuff in Chicago and in Fort Worth as well.
So yeah, that's a challenge. And so, but if you are going, I know you're wondering how well you'll do in these challenges. I know you're wondering what kind of decks will top, and we want to show you shortly here. We're going to get into the final match. We're going to see who wins this tournament. So let's talk about this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I have to start with Joshua. He absolutely blew my socks off when I found the...
Both of us shocked us, right?
Yeah, when we saw the Amber Amethyst deck. I genuinely have not seen that deck built, like that engine built throughout the entire set 3. We've talked and talked and talked in the community and also on this stream about just how diverse this Into the Inklands meta is. It's one of the best card game metas that I've ever played in any card game. It felt like you could literally bring anything into the building today and have success with it. And like, I didn't realize just how true that statement was with Joshua bringing in his Amber Amethyst Mufasa Perdita Chernobog list. Like, what's going on with that deck?
It's crazy. You know, it does show a great approach to tournaments where, you know, if you've got a deck that's a little bit off, that you love, that you've played with, and that you think is good, bring it, try it. Because on the one hand, if you've played with it and you love it, you know you'll play it well. But the other hand is people don't know, people don't expect it. You know, when we were casting that first game, you see Amethyst and you see Amber and you think hyper aggro.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
Right, and as soon as you saw the color combos, we're like, here it goes. This, you know, Josh is going to try to close out this game in like 4 turns, and that's not what we saw.
No.
It was very different. Fairy godmothers, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, something that I really appreciated about this list is it really just goes to show that anybody can, like, you can bring any list into this. Amethyst Amber was not a deck that I think was on anybody's radar for this competition, at least outside of hyper aggro. And Joshua went into the chamber and tested a bunch and decided to bring this concoction that he put together, and it's paying off for him. So like, anybody at home, if you like to brew decks, if you like to test cards that people don't normally play, you can have success at one of these challenges. I mean, Joshua's all the way here in the finals. He just might be the winner of this North American challenge here in Atlanta. With
this off-meta deck. I'm willing to bet if this season extended another month without Ursula's return, that this deck would be everywhere. Inspired by this tournament. So a ton of fun. Now, he did go up against Ruby Amethyst in the semifinals. He ended up taking that match in 2 games, and he's going to see that deck again here in the finals. So let's talk a little bit about Matthew's deck and what his game plan might be going into this.
Yeah, something else that I think is really interesting is in the same way that Joshua went in and brought something completely unique to the venue, you have what I would call the staple deck of Lorcana. If anybody has heard anything about Disney Lorcana, you know about the Ruby Amethyst deck. Since set 1, it has dominated all of the formats, and so it's no surprise that it is here in the finals. And to be honest, it's a relatively standard looking list. There's a couple different things in the list that we've seen that I'm interested to get into in a minute, but it's awesome, in my opinion, that you can both bring something that you've built yourself, that you've worked super hard on, or you can build something that has seen a lot of success in the format, fine-tune it, and bring that as well, and still see success with that.
Yeah, and there's ways to make it your own, and you know, we are going to talk about how Matthew did that here in a second, but there is something to be said for taking a deck in season 1, perhaps, of the first chapter, knowing it very, very well, piloting that deck through successive seasons, making tweaks and bringing it along, and just being a true expert on those colors. And I think that's probably what Matthew's done here.
Yeah, so we talked about how Joshua had to play against Ruby Amethyst in the previous round and make it through that. We saw just how strong the deck seems to be going into Ruby Amethyst. So what do you think Matthew is going to need to do to combat what Joshua is doing with his deck and the engine that he's provided there?
Yeah, this deck, Joshua's deck, just gets so much value out of its cards in the mid game. I think the key to this matchup for Matthew is to really push the lore total early. You know, we've talked before about how Ruby Amethyst is kind of known as a control deck, but it is able to take some really aggressive lines to either go wide early with some 1-drop characters, or perhaps drop a Minnie Mouse Surfer, which is a 2-lore character on turn 3, an evasive character that's difficult to remove. So I think what Matthew's going to want to do is push that lore total high as fast as possible to get within striking distance of goats later in the game, because eventually Joshua is able to go wide with this and just get so gosh, gets so much value out of everything that it becomes very difficult to close him down.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like Joshua has the answers to everything with his deck, so I totally agree. We saw just how strong something like Chernobog was in the beginning against Ruby Amethyst. Luckily, Joshua's only playing one of those, so hopefully I'm sure Matthew's hoping that he doesn't see one of those, but I agree. I think if you go into the late game, Joshua's deck just does too good of a job recycling all of its resources, but I think that the final match that we've all been waiting for the entire weekend has been leading up to this. I think it's ready finally for us to view. So Liam, are you excited? Are you ready to get into this final match of the Disney Lorcana Challenge in Atlanta?
Everything this weekend has been leading up to this moment. So if you're here watching right now, I'm very excited for you and I'm very excited for us. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, we already talked about a lot of what each player needs to see in the opening. Joshua, I imagine, is going to go first. He is the higher seeded player at the 19th seed. Matthew is at the 24th seed, and I imagine Joshua wants to go first in this game. So Joshua is running quite a few one-drop characters. He's playing a couple Pascals, a couple Chernobog's followers, even Cinderella. So I expect to see one of those in the beginning. Oh, it looks like Matthew's actually deciding to go first on this one.
And talking about, being aggressive and going right early and deck adaptations, Pascal is a fun little card that's run in a lot of decks right now, but I don't think you see it terribly often in Ruby Amethyst. So it's fun to see here as a one-drop, and Joshua responding with Zone Pascal. Cards are great if they have evasive, unless your opponent has one as well.
Yeah, it's very funny when we see these Pascals sort of staring at each other, because until somebody decides to exert one like Matthew's doing, then it's like you said, they both have evasive, but when everything has evasive, nothing has evasive. And Matthew actually responds by saying, look, your Pascal can sit there and threaten my Pascal, but my Pascal has a Madam M snake chasing it, and he's trying to get out of here. So he's going to quest and bounce right back to Matthew's hand out of harm's way from Joshua's Pascal.
So here we go, taking a look at Piglet. Piglet is a fun little aggressive card. It only has one lore, but when you have two characters on board, it gets an additional 2 lore, can get quest for 3. In this instance, though, going to the Inkwell and a Kuzco coming on board. Kuzco is a 1/2 with 1 lore. When it's banished, however, its owner gets to draw a card.
Now, I want to highlight something. We do see Joshua's hand, and we've talked about the engine that he has built in this deck with Perdita, being able to bring back some really strong cards like Piglet and like Kuzco. We see that the Perdita is in hand, and we also see another Piglet is in hand. That might be why he was able to ink the first Piglet to begin with, and we also see Kuzco on board. Kuzco does a great job of replacing itself, so as soon as Kuzco goes into the discard, Joshua will get to draw a card once Kuzco's banished, but Perdita can bring Kuzco right back from the discard pile back into play, allowing Kuzco to pair with things like Merlin Crab to trade up, or even just push his lore lead by questing, knowing that if Matthew wastes a turn challenging Kuzco, Matthew's not questing, and the Kuzco's going to go straight to the discard, and Joshua might have the Perdita to just bring him right back again.
Yeah, I do think in this matchup, Joshua is probably happy to take this game long. And wants to take this game into a point where he takes over the board with some of his Mufasas and some of his cards, where he gets a lot of value out of it. So at this point, having a Kuzco go to the discard pile that he can recur to get some card draw off of in the early game is, I think, what he wants to do more than getting that more aggressive Piglet on the board and trying to quest early.
Yeah, and we talked about this kind of opening that we might want to see from Matthew, playing something like a Minnie Mouse, Stylish Surfer, a couple evasive cards to get an early lore lead. And I feel like that Pascal, played by Joshua, sort of stops this game plan. Maybe Matthew didn't have the Minnie Mouse, Stylish Surfer in hand anyway, but I don't think Matthew is starting as fast as he would like to against a deck like this for the reasons you just said. I think Joshua is looking to go into the late game if he can, because he has those recursion abilities through Perdita. He has cards like Mufasa that he can play that can continue to quest or challenge or really do anything, and then use his ability when banished or when leaving to take a character from the top of the deck and put it onto the board.
So here we go. Getting that crab down on turn 3 allows Matthew to sing friends from the other side, get a few more cards, and here we see him taking the line I think that we expected if it was available to him, and that's going wide with characters that can push the lore lead, getting a Pascal on board again. And one thing to mention about Joshua is he doesn't have a lot of removal other than challenging. There's nothing that does damage to his opponent's characters or even really bounces his opponent's characters, it's really challenging or nothing. And so if Matthew can build up a wide board, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Joshua, and he's going to have to be the player responding to Matthew's aggression.
Yeah, that's a great point, Liam. And something that I find interesting in this deck is an Amethyst card that we see quite frequently that helps Amethyst with this problem of having to challenge characters because they have so little removal is Pinocchio. And there aren't any Pinocchios in Joshua's deck list. Now, the Fairy Godmother that we do see on board has a similar ability when a Cinderella card is played, but Joshua is only playing 4 Cinderella Ballroom Sensation, so you have to sort of combo that together if you want to force Matthew to exert one of his cards that are readied. So if I agree with you, if Matthew can go really wide here and make it difficult for Joshua to respond because he doesn't have options to deal with a wide board, he may be able to just overwhelm Joshua's engine that he's working with and squeak his way into 20 lore.
Yeah, absolutely. Fairy Godmother here removing the crab. I think this is an interesting play. It does 2 things for Joshua. One, it does get the crab off the board to avoid any more bounce shenanigans, allowing him to give Challenger 3 to one of his cards. But it also removes a 3-cost Singer from the board. And if I'm looking at this game, I think Joshua has the feeling that Matthew doesn't quite have the cards he needs using friends to draw. And so if Matthew has drawn into another friend from the other side, would love to sing it right now, but that 9's not available anymore with that 3-cost off the board.
Yeah, I also really like this Fairy Godmother because of her stats. She is a 3/4, I believe, just at 3 costs, so she can trade really well into that crab, surviving the challenge and being able to take another challenge from one of Matthew's characters or challenge again. We also see Joshua play the Peter Pan Shadow, a card we haven't seen for quite a while. It's an evasive card with Rush, I believe, and it gives other Rush characters evasive. So even if Matthew wanted to go the route of playing the Pascals, playing the Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfers, and questing with them, he has to be wary now because something like a Madame M. Fox that has Rush can gain evasive with Peter Pan Shadow on board. We see Matthew deciding to use his Pascal to challenge Joshua's Pascal, knowing that Matthew's evasive characters are essentially turned off at this point because of that Peter Pan Shadow. I think this is going to be a key card in this matchup, and it's going to really make it difficult for Matthew to get under Joshua for this game.
No, that's a great point. Peter Pan's Shadow is a really interesting card, a great card to see here. The first one we've seen today, but these are really originally popped in the meta during Rise of the Floodborn, and they were popped in primarily to deal with Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfers, pairing with Foxes, as you suggested, to remove those because they were getting out of control. People were getting a lot of lore off of them. So now in this current meta, they're additionally handy to deal with Tinkerbells and other evasive cards that people have started working in. But in this instance, serving its original purpose and serving as a counter to Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer, perhaps, if Matthew plays that, and also threatening a Pascal. Matthew, of course, choosing to trade Pascals with Joshua now that his Pascal isn't safe anymore.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. Like you said, the Peter Pan Shadow was a counter to Ruby Amethyst mirror matches, and here we see it's not a mirror match, but we see that same technique being used against the Ruby Amethyst deck in the finals, and it's just as effective. We also see Joshua playing a Merlin Goat, which will gain Joshua a lore every time it enters and leaves play. So if Joshua has any Madame M snakes, Madame M foxes that have to bounce a character back to his hand when played, he can utilize this goat to bring it in play and out of play multiple times, gaining multiple lore at a burst speed. And we see him running away already up at 7 lore, while Matthew is only at 3 currently.
Another thing to highlight about Goat, I mean, we focus a lot on its lore gain ability, which I think is its obviously its best use, and you want to make maximum use of bouncing that Goat back to your hand so it enters and leaves play multiple times. But it's also decently statted for a mid-game card with 4 strength. Not a lot of willpower, but if you're worried about controlling your opponent's board, it's a card that you can put on to give yourself a little extra oomph on the challenge. Yeah,
it's putting Matthew in a really difficult spot right here, because if Matthew decides to exert the snake or the rabbit, whether that's to challenge or to quest, the Goat, if Joshua wants to, can challenge into either of them, and in fact could challenge into the rabbit, survive the challenge, and then be bounced back to hand, taking that damage off. So it puts Matthew in a really tough decision here. He wants to get rid of the Cusco because the Cusco is continuing to gain 1 lore every single turn, and he does decide to challenge the Cusco with the snake, knowing that if the Merlin Goat does challenge into the snake, at least it will be banished as well. The Cusco, when banished, will draw a card for Joshua, so he adds another card to hand. And I really like this play from Matthew, playing a Lady Tremaine. When Lady Tremaine is played, your opponent has to choose a card to banish. So Joshua goes for the Merlin Goat here, meaning that takes away any lines of play that Joshua was going to use, like bouncing the Goat or challenging the snake back.
And it also leaves a 2 lore character on board. So in a game where you're trying to race your opponent to 20, like Lorcana, anytime you can get an effect out of a card and then you have a card with 2 or more lore, it feels really good. Matthew now able to use Lady Tremaine to get some more lore, catch up to Matthew's 8 here, and just a really great play. And as we mentioned, if Matthew is able to start going wide a bit here, dropping 3, 4, or 5 characters on the board, Joshua does not have any way to mass remove characters other than challenging.
No, and Matthew's doing a great job at that because even the characters that he's exerting, Joshua can challenge the Merlin Rabbit if he wants with Peter Pan's Shadow, but Peter Pan's Shadow only has 2 strength, so the only thing that it can banish is a Madam M Snake, but the Madam M Snake would banish the Peter Pan Shadow in response to the challenge. But we do see the Perdita come out for Joshua, bringing that Cusco back into play. Just like we talked about earlier in the game, Cusco is going to be troublesome because you can think of Cusco as a little lore gainer. Like, he can exert every turn for really no detriment to you, and if the opponent challenges Cusco and banishes him, you can draw a card, but so long as Perdita's on board, all you have to do next turn is exert the Perdita or quest with the Perdita and then bring the Cusco right back, and the problem just never seems to go away. I think Matthew is going to have to find an answer to this Perdita or else it's going to get out of control.
Yeah, we're now seeing the payoff for putting that Cusco in play early on turn 2, getting it into his discard pile so we can bring it back and get another card off of it.
And Matthew does exactly what we just said, playing the Madame Medusa, seeing the threat that Perdita will cause, using Madame Medusa's ability to banish Perdita in play. Madame Medusa can banish a card that has 3 strength or less when played. And so we go back to Matthew just building that wide board, spreading his characters out, questing with him every turn that he can, and he is slowly catching up to Joshua and slowing Joshua down at the same time.
Yeah, Joshua questing that Peter Pan's Shadow again, picking up another 2 lore. It's a bit of a race now. Joshua, I'm sure, hoping to get another character with 2 or more lore on the board. Perhaps a Mufasa, I know is a card that he would love to draw into at this point. And here we have a Pascal going wide here, and a Piglet, and a Cinderella, so really going wide. Now at this point, it's worth noting we are beyond turn 6, so Matthew able to ink a card, and then we all know what happens on turn 7 in Ruby decks.
Yeah, I think Matthew is really looking to be prepared here if he can to completely banish all characters in play. Matthew could quest with all of his characters, gaining a total of 5 lore, bringing him up just past Joshua at 13, and then play the Be Prepared and pass the turn, removing all of these characters for Joshua. I don't think Joshua has any cards in his hand, so he would draw a card off of the Cusco, and then he would draw a card for turn, and then that's all that he would have to work with. And we do see all of the characters being quested here.
An indicator.
Liam, do you think it's coming?
I think that's what we in the business call an indicator, and here it is.
Here it is, the Be Prepared.
Absolutely, and you know, when you're playing Ruby decks, oftentimes I like to think of turn 6 and beyond as the second phase of the game, because that's when the Lady Tremaines, the Madame Medusas, the Be Prepared, the Scars, all of that comes online, and now you really have to plan around those threats, where in the early game, you can be a little bit more aggressive and go wide.
Yeah, and now Joshua is really just playing off whatever he draws off of the top of his deck. We see him play a Rapunzel and a Cusco, and I don't think this is the scariest thing that Joshua can be playing right now. I think Matthew has an ability to answer it with things like a Madame Medusa we see being played, banishing the Rapunzel, also playing a Rafiki that he can use to challenge the Cusco when played. Joshua draws another Cusco to play, and they're going to gain a couple lore. They're also going to give Joshua another card when Matthew decides to challenge with him, if he decides to challenge with them, or instead maybe decides to race. He's building quite a big board.
Oh, that Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer is such a good play here with 2 lore on the board. I think that puts player 2, I think that puts game on the board right now, forcing Joshua to respond to Matthew's board state. Otherwise, Matthew takes the game next turn.
Yeah, Joshua has to challenge and banish one of Matthew's characters if he wants to keep Matthew from winning next turn. And even then, if you only take out 1 lore, we've said it multiple times across this 2 days, all Matthew needs is a Merlin Goat. He could get to 19 lore, play Merlin Goat, and then that would be game.
And there's just not a lot of removal. So Joshua double challenging with the Cuscos, challenging and banishing Rafiki, sending it to the discard pile and buying himself another turn, playing a Snake to bounce Cusco and bring Cusco back onto the board, giving him 3 lore on board.
Yep, and we see Matthew just pushing his lore lead, questing with Minnie Mouse, Madame Medusa, and Rabbit. Currently, Joshua does not have an evasive character on board, which means he's going to have a really difficult time dealing with this Minnie Mouse, also playing a snake that's going to stay readied, so it's going to be especially difficult for Joshua to answer that because Amber Steel doesn't have great answers for readied characters.
No, it does not. So it's a bit of a bind. Passing it back to Josh, we'll see if he can draw anything that can answer this board state, and it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it looks like Matthew has taken game 1 of this final series. He came out swinging. He came out aggressive, just like we said he probably needed to in order to stop Joshua from building that engine that he's built in his Amber Amethyst deck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was aggressive. It wasn't quite as aggressive as I was expecting, but he did he spent some time gaining control of the board and really owned the mid game where I was expecting Joshua to really control that part of the game. So well played.
Yeah, I think he did a great job of going wide, like we said, making it difficult for Joshua to either keep up with the lore that he was gaining or keep up with the characters that he was going to have to continue to challenge to bring down that wide board. We talked about how Amber Amethyst struggles against those wider boards as well. And I mean, Matthew did a great job at doing that.
Yeah, and a lot of times these decks, at least in the Red Mufasa version, are built around Mufasa. And so Joshua not getting one that game, I wonder if he'll get one in game 2.
I don't know. We'll have to see. Moving right into game 2. I'm excited. Let's get into this. I should have said, let's get down to business, man. I completely missed that one.
Oh, my goodness. How did we not use that line all weekend?
I have no idea.
Oh, my goodness.
It's okay. We're here in the finals.
That's true. All right. Chernobog's minions immediately ink the inkwell to play another Chernobog's minions.
Pretty strong start from Joshua. It's nice to see that one cost. Nice to open up with a character on the play, especially a character that can both gain you a lore and draw you a card if you want to.
Absolutely. It's a great little versatile card, and it's even better when you know that in the later game you can get it back again. So it's a great card that Joshua wants to get on the board. And so this is an opening that we saw in the semifinals also. Chernobog's minions serving multiple functions for Joshua here. One, it can draw him a card if he'd like and get him a lore. It going to his discard pile and being able to bring it back later. But two, it kind of serves as a Rafiki counter where Matthew now can't use his Rafiki to gain lore in perpetuity. Joshua able to challenge that Rafiki and remove it for free.
Yeah, and it looks like that's exactly what Joshua does. He quests with it, and then Rafiki should be able to challenge and banish the Chernobog's followers. So we'll see if he does that and what he follows up with, because if Matthew's holding on to something like a Madame Snake, he may not be able to take that line. He might actually have to leave the Chernobog's followers there, quest with the Rafiki, and then play the Madame Snake just to get a 2-drop on board, because you can't play Madame Snake unless you can bounce a character back to your hand.
Absolutely. Again, we see a Cusco on turn 2, and both of these cards, as we highlighted last game, Cusco and Chernobog's followers are cards that you like to see on the board multiple times if you can, and Perdita allows Joshua to do that. So in the early game here, one of the things Joshua is figuring out is what do I want to put into my discard pile to feed my Perdita later when she comes into play. And so that's part of this early game plan, and Joshua getting 2 cards I think that he's very happy to bring back here.
Absolutely, and I think this is really an interesting play for Matthew. Rather than challenging the Chernobog followers with his Rafiki, and the Rafiki being banished from challenging the Chernobog's followers, he instead inks the Madame Snake, develops a Cusco, and passes the turn.
Yeah, he's definitely playing a more control line, probably leaving that Rafiki ready to challenge a stronger character if that becomes available. But here it allows Joshua to quest again with the Chernobog's followers, and Joshua is now going to banish it to draw a card, activating that ability. And getting an additional card.
Yeah, and Joshua deciding not to exert the Cusco or quest with the Cusco, knowing that the Rafiki is still there and can challenge the Cusco. Rafiki wouldn't be banished in the challenge because Cusco only has 1 strength while Rafiki has 2 willpower. So Joshua can't quite push his lore lead yet with that Rafiki staring down Joshua's board.
But now this Fairy Godmother being on the board is interesting. This is the small Fairy Godmother, 3/4, decently statted with 1 lore, but it's a shift target for the Floodborn Grandmother, which has an awesome ability giving your characters a challenger, and then if they're banished in a challenge, they go back to your hand.
Yeah, it's especially great because she is a shift character, which means, and she only shifts her 2 at that. So you can shift the Fairy Godmother, and her ability activates on quest. So you would be able to quest with Fairy Godmother the turn that Fairy Godmother is shifted onto the little one, like Liam just said, giving everything Challenger +3, and then bouncing back to hand when banished in a challenge. We've seen so many cards that Joshua has played that benefit from being in play and being banished in play. So being able to bring them back into your hand to just replay them immediately can create a lot of value in that scenario.
For cards like Kuzco sitting on board, which can get a little bit stronger challenge into Matthew's characters, get a card and then return to your hand.
Absolutely. We see Matthew thinking through his turn 3 play really hard. This match is untimed. It is the finals, so we want to give these players enough time to think through the correct plays, the best play lines that they have. We see him questing with the Kuzco and then using a Madam M or playing a Madam M Fox to bounce the Kuzco back to hand so that Joshua cannot challenge the exerted Kuzco.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating watching this game play out. These players, both at the top of their game, with decks they know very well, trying to think through the ideal lines of play. And interestingly, normally you want one of these players wants to be the aggressor. They're trying to figure out who the aggressor is. Here, neither one has been able to take really an aggressive line. Each putting characters on board to kind of match the other one and leaving them staring at each other across the field.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about how strong Kuzco can be just because it's a character that you can usually quest with, and you're fine with that, it being banished and drawing you a card, and then bringing it back with something like Perdita. Joshua may not have a Perdita in hand, and also that Rafiki just sitting there is threatening making very favorable trades into the Kuzco, and just in the opposite sense, Joshua has that Fairy Godmother sitting there that can make pretty favorable trades as well into Matthew's board, and so we're sort of at a stalemate here. We do see Joshua decide to exert the Kuzco and offer up the challenge to Matthew if Matthew wants to take it.
Madam M Fox now singing Friends from the other side.
Friends on the Other Side is such a great card in Amethyst. We've seen it since set 1, and it simply says draw 2 cards. It's probably
no strings attached.
Yeah, no strings attached. You just get to draw 2 cards. Probably one of the stronger Amethyst cards printed because, I mean, having more cards than your opponent is pretty good.
More cards is better. It's nice to have friends.
It is amazing to have friends, and Amethyst has plenty of them. Looks like the players are trying to clear something up. Matthew's trying to ask a question to our judges.
And again, which is fantastic. I have to kudos to our judges who are sitting here making sure everything's going right. When you play games at this level and these stakes are on the line, it's nice to be confident that everything is happening in the game according to the rules, and that you're comfortable that it was a fair game. So having the judges there to ask questions, these really professional judges who know the rules inside and out, to ask these questions of is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to have them handy to clear up rules that you don't know, because although we all love this game, there's some very intricate interactions that can happen, and not all of us know all of those intricate interactions, and the judges have decided to learn those things for us so that they can help us play this game to our best ability. We do see Matthew playing this Kuzco that he bounced back earlier with the Madam M Fox.
Looks like he considered challenging with the Rafiki there, thinking about whether to remove that Kuzco or not, and now thinking second thoughts. It's so fascinating. When you play these games, especially at this level, there it is challenging the Kuzco, Kuzco then allowing Joshua to draw a card. You come to these turns sometimes where you have 2 different directions you could go, 2 different plays you can make, which will take your next few turns in wildly different paths. And so sometimes in the mid-game here, it doesn't seem like there's a lot on the line, but the players are thinking so carefully about which way they want, their subsequent turns to go. And so you agonize over those decisions sometimes, even when you're far away from 20 lore and the game is far from over.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things about Disney Lorcana is just how intricate this game can be. The core rules are relatively simple to pick up, they're easy to learn, but the actual gameplay itself can be very complex. And something as simple as challenging the Cusco with the Rafiki on this turn, or inking certain cards instead of others, can make or break these games. They can come back to bite you later in the game when you need a specific card that you put in your inkwell, or decided to make a trade that you shouldn't have because now Joshua can challenge and banish the Rafiki, and you might need the Rafiki later to have challenged something more threatening.
Here we have Joshua questing, scooping up a lure with that rabbit.
We see a very familiar play, questing with the rabbit, bouncing the rabbit back to hand with Madam M. Fox, doing the nice Merlin Mim chase that we see in the movies.
It was a chase. It was a card combo so obvious that they put it in the starter deck so that we could all play with it, and players have carried it from that starter deck into tournament play, and we see it played out here. Followed by a Piglet. Piglet, a card with 1 lore, but it gets +2 lore if there are 2 other characters on the board, turning it from a relatively inconsequential card to a scary card pretty quickly.
Yeah, especially because Joshua has the ability to play quite a few characters at once. He plays a couple expensive cards, but right now the Madam M. Fox is exerted, so even if Matthew decides to challenge the Madam M. Fox with his Madam M. Fox and remove that so that Piglet no longer has 2 lore, all Joshua has to do is play a second character that next turn, and Piglet's got that 2 lore right back again. But instead, it looks like Matthew sings Friends on the Other Side with Madam M. Fox, and then finds a Merlin Crab, decides to play Merlin Crab, which would give his Cusco Challenger +3, allowing him a challenge for 4 total strength so that you can banish the Madam M. Fox, which is really important because you would rather trade with your Cusco than you would your own Madam M. Fox. When Cusco's banished, Matthew gets to draw a card, and that Madam M. Fox gets to stay in play with all of that strength, 4 strength on Madam M. Fox, so that if Joshua decides to challenge the Madam M. Fox to banish it with something like his Fairy Godmother, the Fairy Godmother will also be banished in that challenge.
Absolutely. Crab, a really versatile card, which allows you to do some shenanigans like that, some tricks, and definitely using it to maximum effect here. You know, the Fox, not only is it a stronger character to have on the board, but it's important to keep for a couple of reasons. One, it is a singer for cards like Friends on the Other Side. We've seen 2 played, but there could be others. But 2, you can do weird things like Fox loops, where you bounce foxes for other foxes doing challenges and stuff. So giving you a little more utility on the board than Cusco.
Absolutely. It is a package that we see play in Amethyst all the time, just for those reasons that you just mentioned, being able to pick up and put down characters. But I mean, even the utility of something like Madam M. Fox having Rush, being able to challenge immediately while using the Crab to give something challenger, or pick up the Rabbit to draw a bunch of cards, or pick up the Goat to gain a bunch of lore. There's just a ton of utility in that package, and it makes total sense why it's in just about every Amethyst build that we see.
Yeah, here's a fun little play. This is one we highlighted last game where we mused about whether there were Cinderellas in this deck. But here, Fairy Godmother has 1 ability which allows you to exert an opponent's character when a Cinderella comes into play. And lo and behold, Joshua plays a Cinderella to exert Merlin Crab and then challenge with the Fairy Godmother to remove the Crab, leaving her with 1 remaining willpower. So a fun little combo there, and probably one that we haven't seen a tournament play terribly often. And here it is in the finals of the first North American Lorcana Challenge.
And you know, one thing that I think I'm just now noticing about Joshua's deck list, I'm not sure that Joshua plays any actual songs. So I think that the Cinderella is purely in here to combo with the Fairy Godmother.
I think that's right.
Using her ability, which is really interesting, but makes sense. He's playing a Mufasa, or he's playing a deck that plays 4 Mufasas, playing a deck that plays 4 Perditas, and he is playing 1 Churnabox follower. So it is a very character-heavy deck where you want characters in your discard pile. You don't want to be hitting anything other than characters off of those Mufasas when the Mufasas get banished. So it's just a pretty interesting thing there that he decides to run the combo of Cinderella and Fairy Godmother, and it seems to be working for him.
It definitely works here, and you know, Cinderella at 1 cost can be brought back from the discard pile with Perdita, perhaps allowing you to do that combo several times. So it's a fun little trick.
We do see Joshua finally taking a little bit of board control here, removing some of what Matthew was working with. Matthew deciding to ink a Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer and banishing the piglet in a challenge. Can't let that piglet continue to gain lore. It's got too much lore. Also going to play Madame and Medusa to get rid of that Merlin rabbit. You don't want that rabbit bouncing around, drawing a bunch of cards for Joshua if you can help it.
No, as you said last game, Brandon, or we talked about earlier, the rabbit, it does feel bad banishing the rabbit, giving your opponent a card, but if you give your opponent a card off of it and they've gotten 2 cards off the rabbit, that is the minimum they can get. If they do some bounce shenanigans and draw multiple cards, it feels even worse. So removing it is probably the best option.
Absolutely. And when the rabbit leaves, the rabbit comes back.
So many rabbits.
Joshua just has another that he's able to play to draw another card, and he will use the Cinderella to finish off the Madame M. Fox, getting it out of play.
Now, we talked about last game how we moved into a second phase of the game, I think, with Ruby when we get to turn 6. And here, just like we talked about Matthew hitting his one of his 6 cost removal cards with Madame Medusa. So now on Matthew's next turn, the removal options are really going to open up, and we're at a point in the game where Joshua has to think a little bit more carefully about what he's putting on the board and making vulnerable.
Yeah, Liam, has the stream frozen or something? I could have sworn that just a couple turns ago, Matthew got rid of the piglet and the rabbit, and they continue to still be on the screen somehow. There's just looks like every time
there's a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah, there's a glitch in the matrix. Matthew continues to remove these characters, and Joshua just seems to have them to play again, except this time he does get a Pascal. Pascal will, of course, have evasive because there's another character in play. And Pascal and Piglet sort of play off of each other. They each care about other characters being in play. Pascal having evasive, Piglet gaining extra lore. We do see Matthew play another Medusa to get rid of that rabbit, saying, "You did it I did it once, and I'll do it again. I don't want you drawing any extra cards off of this rabbit."
I do think these might be key plays down the road because this deck, I think Joshua's deck, has a lot of cards that are low cost, and it has the ability to go wide, but at the cost of cards in your hand. And without those rabbits and being able to use them to maximum effect, I think this deck could stall out. So getting rid of those rabbits could pay off. But here we have the Mufasa, which he failed to find in game 1. Mufasa, just a great card, 2 lore on the board, so it can quest and get you closer to victory. But more importantly, when it's banished in a challenge and goes to your discard pile, you can look at the top card of your deck, and if it's a character card, you can put it in play for free.
Yeah, it is a really strong card, especially in a deck that is so character heavy and plays quite a few characters that you'd like to see in play. Playing those, we've talked about the Cuscos, the Piglets gaining a bunch of lore, even something like a Rapunzel. If a Rapunzel gets pulled off of the top and you have a damaged character, you can immediately heal something and draw a bunch of cards. So also, another fun interaction here is the Madame Mim thing as well. If you pull a Madame Mim Snake or Madame Mim Fox off of the top of your deck, then you can bounce one of your maybe exerted characters that are vulnerable that Matthew decided not to challenge if he decides to get rid of the Mufasa first. So Mufasa, I think, is a really great card in this deck for those reasons.
One thing I have to correct, I did think I misspoke and said that Mufasa has to be banished in a challenge for that to work. It's not. It's banished, period.
Oh, yeah, banished at all.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons it's so popular, because when you're playing a deck, for example, with Be Prepared, and your opponent clears the board, that leaves you immediately with a character on the board, allowing you to build your board state faster than your opponent.
Yeah, that's why I love the Mufasa plays in board states like this. Joshua is putting a lot of pressure on Matthew right now with both the Piglet, the Pascal, and then decides to play Mufasa because he's building a wide board, knowing that Matthew has enough ink to play Be Prepared, and it's Matthew is incentivized to play Be Prepared right now to get rid of all of these characters, but he also knows that that will come at the cost of banishing the Mufasa and potentially drawing something off the top to immediately be put into play. So luckily for Matthew, the Piglet and the Pascal are exerted. Of course, he can't challenge the Pascal because the Pascal has evasive, but he can banish that Piglet that has 3 lore and has been pushing Joshua closer and closer to 20. I mean, Joshua's already halfway to his win condition.
Joshua here taking a look at the cards in his discard pile, spreading them out, showing both Matthew and himself what's in there. This is important for a variety of reasons. One is the Perdita we talked about, which can pull cards back. But the other, as we mentioned earlier and you saw in previous rounds, there's one copy of Chernabog in this deck, which cares about characters in your discard pile because it makes it a lot cheaper to play.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, Chernabog would be quite a difficult card for Matthew to take care of. Ruby has a lot of ways to outright banish characters, but In Matthew's deck list, there's only about 6 cards that can actually outright banish, or not even banish, or just get rid of the Chernobog. He's running 3 Be Prepareds, which of course he can use to do that, but we've already talked about how the Mufasa on board makes that a pretty difficult play or tricky play if we do see a Chernobog come out. He's also playing a couple Yzma,
Scary Beyond All Reason.
Scary Beyond All Reason, thank you, Liam. That you can choose a character and shuffle that character back into the player's deck, and then that player draws 2 cards. That would be another way to get rid of the Chernobog. Or Matthew's also playing a single copy of Lady Tremaine, which your opponent has to choose a character to banish when Lady Tremaine is played. So you would have to have just Chernobog on Joshua's board in order to even do that. So not a ton of options for Matthew if that is in the cards. I'm not sure if Joshua has that in his hand or not, or if we're anywhere close to that, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Joshua here questing for 3 with 2 characters. 1 that he doesn't mind losing terribly much in the Mufasa, and 2 the Pascal, which should be fairly safe from a challenge.
Yeah, the fun thing about Mufasa is it's just sort of teasing or tempting Matthew to say, you need to banish me, but I know you don't want to banish me. I'm going to continue to gain 2 lore every turn that you allow me to until you banish me, and then when you do, I'm going to benefit off of it.
Now, this is a very aggressive play, and it's a little bit risky because what it's opened up for Matthew is the ability to challenge the Mufasa, get the card off the top deck, and then play a Be Prepared, leaving Mufasa not there on the board to get a character back when the board is wiped. So here is exactly what Matthew's doing. He's banishing Mufasa, bringing back a Perdita, which immediately gives him the effect of pulling a character of 2 costs or less back from the discard pile to play. Joshua choosing Cusco, a card that will get him a card when it's banished. So now Matthew has the ability to play the Be Prepared without triggering the Mufasa. Joshua, of course, knew this and chose to pursue the lore, getting him to 15, knowing that this was an option and deciding at this moment to strike, and I think really push his lore total.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where he's telling Matthew, you either have it or you don't. If you don't have it, I take this game and we go on to game 3. If you do have it, then I think that's why he chose the Cusco in his discard rather than something like the Piglet, because if Matthew decides to play Be Prepared, both the Rabbit and the Cusco would be banished, and both of those would draw a card off of the Be Prepared, giving Joshua some more cards in hand. And we do see that Be Prepared being played after Matthew played a Madam M Snake, and I missed what he picked up. What did he pick up there?
He picked up a Madam Medusa.
Okay, there we go. Which definitely makes sense. Just keeping another answer for whatever Joshua has to play after this.
So here we are, clean slates, over to Joshua to rebuild the board.
Yeah, having refilled his hand just a little bit, like we mentioned earlier with the Cusco and the Rabbit. We'll see what he drew into. We see another Mufasa coming in alongside a Cusco and a Cinderella. Man, Joshua just refills his board so quickly.
So quickly, playing the Mufasa. And of course, Joshua knows that the Madame Medusa is over there and able to banish something, but playing the Mufasa saying, you can remove it and try your luck.
Yep, try it again. We'll see what we pull off the top. Joshua checking Matthew's discard right now, probably seeing how many removal options Matthew might still have, because this is sort of a game of attrition. Joshua's going to continue to play characters that continue to bring back characters or bring other characters into play that he doesn't have to play for, or that he doesn't have to pay for, and Matthew is going to have to remove them, especially because Joshua has such a lore lead on Matthew right now. Matthew doesn't have the luxury of keeping these characters in play and letting him quest too much, because, I mean, Joshua's an Amethyst, and we know what card is an Amethyst.
It's the GOAT.
It is the GOAT.
It's the GOAT. And that's the thing, when you look at these Amethyst decks that run GOATs, especially GOAT bounces, 20 lore is the win condition, but 18 is really kind of the danger area. 17 even, 17, 18, 19. So Joshua's looking to push his lore there, and at that point, if we can just draw the game out, he'll eventually draw into a GOAT, which he can use to win the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that Matthew has to keep in mind. And we see him trying to slow down Joshua a little bit by playing the Rabbit, also playing the Madame Medusa to banish some of Joshua's characters. And we see Joshua, and it just makes sense. He's pushing his lore. He's so close to 20. He wants to get as close as he can, keeping the aggression on Matthew, trying to finish out this game. Oh, okay, this is an interesting play. Joshua playing the Peter Pan Shadow, which has evasive, and Matthew is going to really struggle to be able to get rid of this. Joshua is showing game on board with a total of 4, 5, 6 lore total. So Matthew would need to get rid of 4 lore on the board, which is going to be difficult because some of that 4 lore is a Mufasa, carrying 2 of it. We know that if Mufasa gets banished, then another character is likely to come into play also.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter Pan's Shadow, we talked before about the versatility, giving your rush characters evasive, but here it's serving as a lore battery. It has 2 lore and just 1 more 2 lore character for Matthew to deal with. Really looking for another Be Prepared here probably is his best option.
Yeah, and even after a Be Prepared, Joshua's going to turn a card over off the top of his deck and play it immediately. Matthew thinking really hard about his lines, what his outs are, seeing how he needs to play this turn to save this game. Matthew starts by challenging the Cusco, banishing it, and picking the rabbit back up with Madam Snake, I imagine, to draw a card, see if he draws into an answer. He can also play the rabbit again to draw another card to try to find another answer to just slow Joshua down a little bit.
Unfortunately, you play rabbit 1 more time, you draw another card. Even if you ink this turn, you have 5. Most of your removal options are at 6. So really, at this point, forced to use whatever he has in his hand, banishing Pan's Shadow there, but still leaving 3 lore on the board, which is enough to close out the game. Here goes Madame Medusa into Fox, removing that 1 lore. Now you have Mufasa standing alone with 2 lore, not able to close out the game on his own, but still getting you that much closer.
Yeah, Matthew had to get rid of that Peter Pan Shadow first because Madam M. Fox has Rush, and Peter Pan Shadow gives your Rush characters evasive. So it was nice for Matthew to have that Madam Medusa to get rid of the Peter Pan Shadow, remove the evasive from Madam M. Fox, so then he could challenge it with his other Madam Medusa that he had played previously, and remove that from board, leaving just the Mufasa, which can only quest for 2. But like we've said, if Joshua finds something like a Merlin Goat, that's all that it's going to take to end this game. We see Matthew playing a Maleficent Sorcerer, which lets him draw a card when he is played, and that is all of his ink, I believe. So he's deciding what he wants to do with the rest of his turn. He's just going to pass. We'll see what Joshua picks up here. He immediately quests for 2 with Mufasa. It doesn't seem like he has a goat in hand. Otherwise, I imagine we would have seen it already. Okay, and Joshua is just going to play a little bit wide, force Matthew to get rid of all of these characters, which is going to be a little tough. Matthew could do this again with the same way he did before, challenging the Mufasa, seeing what Mufasa pulls off the top, and then playing a Be Prepared if he has it to completely wipe Joshua's board. We see him challenge the Mufasa with the Madame Medusa, pull off a Fairy Godmother off of the top.
Nice card to pull off the top
enter Exerted. I think Matthew has 11 ink total, so he can play 4 ink worth of cards before he has to have the Be Prepared to play.
And there is the Be Prepared. He had it.
He had the Be Prepared. We'll see if he has anything else in his hand. He still has a couple ink, I believe, that he could at least develop something, get it on board before Joshua is able to play other things as well. And we see he decides to play Merlin Rabbit, draw a card, and just dig a little bit deeper into his deck, hopefully keeping or finding some answers for whatever Joshua is about to play next.
You know, this game is close. It's still not unwinnable for Matthew, believe it or not. You know, you always play to your outs. Matthew here doing exactly that, putting things on the board, drawing another card. There's a lot of removal options, you know, that Ruby has available, and so he has an answer for single characters that are dropped on the board, and several of the Be Prepareds. Of course, you know, we keep talking about the goat and how important the goat is to this deck, but for all we know, all 4 goats could be stacked onto the bottom of this deck just due to bad luck. And so always play to your outs, and this game is still in play.
It's definitely happened before, and we see where Joshua's deck shines here, being to feel like constantly play wide. All he had to do here was play a Perdita. He immediately can bring a Cusco back into play, and now Matthew doesn't just have to take care of one character, he has to take care of two. And Matthew is eventually going to run out of Be Prepared. He's already played quite a few Madame Medusas, and since these characters are ready, it's going to be, or Perdita and Cusco specifically are ready, it makes it that much harder for Matthew to interact with him and banish them before Joshua goes to the next turn, because all Joshua needs is a single readied character that has lore and conquest in order to win this game on the next turn. So we see another Madame Medusa come down to banish the Perdita, leaving the Cusco. Matthew still has to get rid of this.
And the only 2-cost card, exactly the right amount of ink to exert that character, making it challengeable, and Rabbit coming across there and taking care of Cusco, giving Joshua a card, though, however, in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give props to Matthew here. He is playing this match perfectly. He's finding his outs, he's finding the lines, he's creating a lot of pressure. He has a ton of cards on board. Joshua's deck struggles a lot to play against a wide board, and if Matthew can delay this game by just a few turns, Matthew might be able to actually swing this in his favor.
Currently showing 5 lore on the board. Pass it back to Joshua. But as you suggested earlier, you only have so many answers. So every time Joshua is able to drop 2 characters on board, it's just really difficult. A lot of the answers available to Matthew right now, other than Be Prepared, are spot removal. Will banish a single card. And so you have to, pending multiple of those a turn, is a little tricky.
Yeah. You can always pick up his Madame Medusa and play it if he has a bounce character, again, using the resources, recycling them, which is something that Amethyst does really well. But it looks like Matthew does not have the answer, and Joshua is going to take game 2. Guys, we have a game 3 finals match.
And I have no idea which way this is going to go. What's fascinating to me, coming in here is that out of these first 2 games, in the first one, it really felt like Matthew was in control most of the game, and carried it away pretty easily. And then in the second game, Joshua really felt in control the entire game. And so going into game 3, I have no idea which way this is going to go.
Yeah, I think Joshua did such a great job that last game at using his cards to the most efficiency. So he was able to continue to play a wide board and just force Matthew to play this game where he was constantly answering his stuff. And as soon as Matthew answered Joshua's board, Joshua was ready to respond and play something else like a Perdita to bring back other cards. And so Matthew just eventually started running out of resources to play to get back into this game. And I feel like, like you said, game 3 could go either way. We've seen a game in which Joshua won. We've seen a game against Matthew won. Both of them now have a really great understanding, or should have a pretty good understanding, of what each deck is trying to do, and they're going to have to play to their outs, just like we saw Matthew doing in this game too.
Yeah, and now having each played each other once, they're thinking about their game plans. They're each trying to figure out which way they want to attack this game, figure out which way to go best. I think this is this is probably my favorite way that this could have ended, because you have a deck, as we said from the start, that is kind of came out of nowhere, that was built and making it all the way to the finals against the original, I think, deck, the original popular deck that was everywhere in Chapter 1. It's continued to persist as one of the best decks, even though it's teched just slightly differently. One of the things that I absolutely love, though, about Joshua's deck is it's teched perfectly in that each one of the cards in this deck, you can get maximum value out of. It does multiple things, and you can use everything multiple times. So each card, if I had to count the number of effects that Joshua got off of a single Cusco or a single, even Cinderella, bringing to play, exerting a character, and coming back, gosh, I'd run out of hands.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at Joshua's deck list, it really seems like he has an answer for everything. Any sort of board state that he has, if he has a bunch of characters in his discard, he has the Perditas that he can bring them back. If he has not a lot of characters in his discard, he can play his Mufasas, or if he's trying to build a wide board against Ruby Amethyst, wants to get away from something like a Be Prepared, he can play those Mufasas instead. We didn't see the Chernabog that game, but the Chernabog could be a huge threat that could come into play playing against Matthew as well. But I have to go back and talk a little bit about what you were saying just a second ago. I don't think I could have asked for a better final match. Like, we are playing in a set that has been known to be the most diverse set in Disney Lorcana so far. So the fact that there is the the raid boss, for lack of a better word, of Ruby Amethyst, the one that came out the gate running in set 1 as the most dominant deck, versus a deck that nobody saw coming out of anywhere, is just the perfect way to end this. You know, if Joshua ends up winning this finals, then it is a testament to Into the Inklands and how diverse the set was. I mean, regardless if he wins or not, there were plenty of things in the top cut that were very versatile, but it would just be a nice cherry on top to show just how fun and interesting the Into the Inklands set has been to play in.
Yeah. As we're going to talk real quick about what we think the keys to the victory are here for each of these decks in Game 3. As we're doing that, if you're in the Twitch chat, we want to know which deck do you think is going to come out on top, and which deck do you want to see win? I'm pretty excited. I bet you if we were to poll Twitch chat right now, we'd get a 50-50 response, and that's I can't make up my mind either.
I can either. Like, it could really go either way, and it might genuinely come down to just which person draws the best cards. It may not even be in their control. They're two very good players. They've had to go through almost 2,000 other players to get here, so they certainly know what they're doing. They are world-class players, to be honest with you, and so it's not a matter of skill. I think it's going to be a matter of what they can do with the hands that they're dealt.
It's a common phrase and one that's especially applicable here in the final. So I'm going to tell you what I think the keys to victory are for Matthew here, and I think it's very similar to what I've said before, and then I'm interested in what you think about Joshua. But for Matthew, I do think still that the aggressive line is probably the one that gives him the best chance of victory, getting a Minnie Mouse Surfer on the board early, perhaps going wide, forcing Joshua to respond to him early, and driving the lore total as high as possible as we get into the late game and more removal options become available. But I do think you're right. I mean, as with any Lorcana game, altering your hand in the very beginning is key, and what each player is lucky enough to draw off the initial draw, and then what they choose to alter into their game plan will really set them up for success or failure here.
Absolutely. We know that Matthew will be going first in this game because he lost this past round, but I think you're right about his game plan. Knowing that he's going to want to have to go fast, going to want to have to go wide and be aggressive, I think Joshua's going to have to alter his hand and be ready to respond to that. He knows that Matthew is playing the Minnie Mouse Surfers. He's playing a couple of evasive characters, so we saw how strong the Peter Pan Shadow was, the Pascal was, utilizing those Merlin Crabs to buff those up, utilizing the Peter Pan Shadow so that you can threaten those characters with Madam M. Fox and deny Matthew from gaining a bunch of extra lore off of those evasive cards and some of those aggressive cards, and then start getting that engine rolling. Use the Perditas to bring back your Cuscos, use the engine to bring back your Piglets when you can gain a lore advantage, and when you do finally get the advantage, you can start playing your Mufasas on the wide board so that when Matthew has to start responding to Joshua, you can start making the most out of that.
You just said one key card that I want to highlight before we get to the match here, and that is Mufasa. Joshua didn't find it in Game 1. He did find it in Game 2. I think that's a critical card to play in the mid-game here because you're playing it on turn 5 right when your opponent is moving to the phase of the game with Ruby that they have their removal options available, especially be prepared. So whether or not he finds a Mufasa in the mid-game here around turn 5 and 6, I think will be key to victory.
Absolutely. I think it's about time we move into this final game. I want some hype in the chat. We've been waiting all weekend for this moment here. We couldn't get a final any better than this. We're going to Game 3. Liam, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's get down to business.
Let's get down to business. To win the Disney Lorcana Challenge. That doesn't roll off the tongue.
It doesn't. We'll have to
well.
perfect that for next time.
Yeah, we'll have to practice, I guess.
All right, both players still aren't altering their hands here. You know, one thing we've mentioned earlier is how important this phase of the game is, choosing what to keep in your opening hand and what to discard. Games can be won or lost right here in this stage of the game.
I think it's one of the most appreciated points of Disney Lorcana. A lot of players understand about board state and how trades work and resources and efficiency, but the mulligan system in Lorcana is so generous that you have the benefit of being able to put back any card that you want from your opening hand and draw that many cards back up to 7. So if there are certain cards that are really strong in a matchup or really important that you need in a matchup, in this case we've talked about the Mufasa, Peter Pan Shadow, something like Minnie Mouse Surfer, even Madame Medusa, you can put back the cards that you know you don't need and dig really deep deep, up to 7. You can essentially go 14 cards deep into your deck before the game even starts if you want to. And like you said, I think games can be made or broken purely on how aggressive or not aggressive you decide to mulligan.
And here we go, Matthew, on the play here, going first, opening up with a Rafiki.
Probably not his ideal opening. I think he probably would be looking for something like a Pascal, being on the play, wanting to get a bit of an aggressive start. But at least the Rafiki sitting there will be able to hopefully keep Joshua from questing with any of his characters. We do see the Rafiki being quested with here. It's partially because Cinderella cannot challenge and banish Rafiki. Cinderella only has 1 strength, and Rafiki has 2 willpower.
No, that's right. I actually think Cinderella is not the ideal opening for Joshua here. I think Joshua would much prefer to have one of his Chernobog followers, giving him the versatility to draw a card off of it or to challenge that Rafiki. Cinderella in here, as a 1-cost character that can come back, there's nothing to sing. There's no songs, but also as a card that works with Fairy Godmother. But a turn 1 play, but probably not the one he wanted to see.
Yeah, and we see Matthew doing something that Amethyst does really well. We've seen it all the time, playing your 1-cost character, questing with that character, bouncing the character back, and Joshua follows suit, doing the exact same thing with Cinderella, snakes staring at each other.
Across the board. So here, Matthew questing for 1, saying, all right, Joshua, you need to respond to me. I'm going to be the aggressor. If you want to banish my snake, you can, but I'm not going to let you get free lore and quest. So Matthew here definitely showing that he's going to take the more aggressive line if it's available to him.
Yeah, especially when you're on the play and you are the first person that can play something like a Madame Snake. Yours is going to drive before your opponent's. It's very advantageous for you to quest like this because now Joshua has a decision to make. He can decide, okay, do I continue to put pressure as well and try to match Matthew in this lore race by questing with my Madame Snake and developing characters further, or do I make this trade with his Madame Snake to keep him from gaining any more lore? And we see him making that trade, playing the Fairy Godmother, which I kind of like here because Fairy Godmother has great stats for a card. It is an inkable 3-cost 3/4, which will trade favorably into this Madame Snake that's only a 3/3. So the Fairy Godmother will survive with 1 willpower left.
Absolutely. The math here very much in Joshua's favor. As you suggest, with Matthew taking the more aggressive approach here, he'd probably like to quest with that snake if he could, but unfortunately, Fairy Godmother shutting that down. So it's a perfect example of, Matthew having a game plan, hoping to quest here, and Joshua shutting that down with just a well-statted character at the appropriate time. And here we see this combo again.
Yeah.
With Cinderella coming down, activating the ability on Fairy Godmother, which says, when a Cinderella is played, you may exert an opponent's character. So exerting the rabbit here, making it vulnerable to a challenge.
I think this is a really huge play. Dare I say, maybe game winning. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but being able to exert this rabbit and deny Matthew the value that comes from having a rabbit and being able to bounce the rabbit back and forth, drawing a bunch of cards. We saw in the last game how much Matthew had to dig and draw cards to find answers to Joshua's board state. And so the fact that Matthew only was able to play the rabbit, get the 1 draw off of it, not even be able to quest with it, and Joshua able to deny all of that value that I'm sure Matthew was looking to get from the rabbit, and then on top of that, being able to play the Madame Fox, bounce the Cinderella back so that you can do that again. And a challenge with the Madame Fox that still survives the challenge against Rabbit. I mean, I feel like that was a huge tempo shift for Joshua here.
Absolutely. Having that Cinderella back in the hand, now Matthew has to think about that. Anything that he plays right now is vulnerable to be challenged. Although Matthew says, all right, turnabout is fair play here. I'll exert your character, making it vulnerable, and perhaps we see a fox of his own here.
I really like this play because I feel like we are seeing 2 sides of the same coin. We talked earlier about how Joshua isn't playing the Pinocchio talkative puppet, which would do the same thing as this Fairy Godmother Cinderella play of being able to exert a character when you want to. So we see both of those options happening, and so Matthew exerts the Fairy Godmother. We'll see if he decides to challenge into it, and if he has something that he can something else he can challenge with it to banish it. and it does look like he had a Madam M Fox that he could play to challenge and get rid of this fairy godmother, knowing that Joshua was holding on to that Cinderella and knowing that that was going to be a real problem for Matthew. Like you mentioned earlier, Liam, not being able to really play anything of value because you knew it was going to be able to be exerted by that Cinderella and fairy godmother combo.
So remember how we talked about how the Mufasa is probably key in the mid-match, and key to the mid-match here, because once the options opened up on turn 6, Matthew can start removing things, has some really good removal, and having that Mufasa to replace itself with something off the top of the deck feels really good. What you don't necessarily like to see is the Pascal, a card that doesn't give you a ton of value for that Mufasa when it's removed, but nonetheless able to quest here. It gets evasive because Joshua plays a couple Cuscos, so getting a lore, but probably would have liked to see something bigger.
Now, one of the risky things about Mufasa is that it can be a really strong card. It can play cards from the top of your deck that have very strong interplay abilities. Sometimes it misses like this and plays a Pascal, and the most risky part about it is every one of those cards interplay exerted. And so Pascal, of course, only has evasive when there are other characters on board. There, of course, were not any other characters on board, but luckily for Joshua, Matthew also didn't have any other characters on board or any rush characters that he could play to challenge the Pascal before Joshua was able to respond with 2 Cuscos, ensuring that Pascal stays safe with evasive and being able to use it to his full ability.
But now, of course, we're reaching turn 7. So Joshua now, thinking about what to play, but knowing that Be Prepared is an option. So Joshua, of course, would love to go wide at some point and push his lore total, get closer to victory, but has to think about doing that in a controlled manner, knowing that the Be Prepared is coming.
I wonder if the Mufasa came out a little early, because we talked about this and we saw it in the previous match where Joshua was able to build quite a wide board, and then around when turn 7 came around, when you're a little bit scared of a Be Prepared coming down, you can play a Mufasa and say, you can try to Be Prepared me, but I'm immediately going to pull something off the top of my deck and play it. And instead, Joshua decides to play Merlin Goat, gaining a lore when it enters play.
Maleficent coming into play, allowing Matthew to draw a card. And another talkative puppet, exerting Merlin Goat, making it vulnerable to a challenge. And we'll likely see perhaps Madame Medusa come in here and remove that goat so that Joshua doesn't get any more value out of it.
Yeah, and this is where Merlin Goat's stats come into play, like you had mentioned earlier. The fact that Merlin Goat has 4 strength and banishes the Madame Medusa when it is challenged, although you're happy to see the Merlin Goat be banished and get off of Joshua's board so that Joshua doesn't get any more value out of it, it feels really bad for Matthew to have to trade his Madame Medusa. He won't be able to bounce the Madame Medusa back to hand, and that's at least one that is down that he's not going to have an answer for later in the game.
Here we have Perdita, another card allowing Joshua to maximize the value of the cards in his deck. Pulling back a Snake, not a move we've seen before. A Snake doesn't give you any effect when it enters or leaves play, but it's a very well-statted character. And so a 3/3 now on the board for free with the Perdita play.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that happens when Perdita manages to bring Madame M Snake back, in that normally when Madame M Snake is played, you have to bounce a character back to your hand, or else the Snake just becomes banished again. So you can do this really fun thing with Perdita where you pull the Madame M Snake back from the discard pile and play it, and that gives you an opportunity to take a card off of the board of yours for free back to your hand that's exerted, and we saw him do that with the Pascal.
And save it from the Be Prepared.
And save it from the Be Prepared, exactly. We do see the Be Prepared come down from Matthew, clearing the board, resetting the game, and this is honestly still a really tight race. Matthew is only at 6 lore and Joshua is at 10, but I mean, comparatively, that's not super far off, and we do see Joshua come back and respond with the Perdita plus Cusco combo, one that we are getting familiar with the more we watch Joshua play this deck.
Absolutely. What I love about what Joshua did there, Joshua knows the Be Prepared is an option, and he's trying to put enough lore on the board that Matthew has to play it so that Joshua can then get into the post-Be Prepared phase and start to rebuild his board. So he could have and there's another Be Prepared. He could have, in that first scenario, used Perdita to pull back a Cusco or something else that got him some value, but instead he did pull back the Snake, bouncing a Pascal, just putting a little bit more lore on the board with Perdita, and basically forcing that Be Prepared.
Yeah, and the fact that Matthew's already down 2 Be Prepareds means that Joshua can play around a little bit riskier if he wants to. Joshua's doing a very, very great job of, like you mentioned earlier, putting just enough lore on board that Matthew has to play this Be Prepared. He's not overextending. He's playing just enough to put enough pressure so that Matthew thinks about playing a Be Prepared, but isn't getting a ton of value off of the Be Prepared. So, for instance, Matthew Be Prepared's right now, Joshua's going to draw 2 cards off of the Rabbit and the Cusco, and he's only taking 2 lore off of the board. But if he doesn't do anything or doesn't get rid of any of these cards, Joshua's gaining 3 lore a turn, and after 2 or 3 turns, that's going to get him dangerously close to 20 lore and taking this match entirely.
Yeah, this deck is really shining right now, and you can see what it's trying to do. With this amount of ink on the board, every time the Rabbit or the Cusco is removed, with a Be Prepared or anything else, giving Joshua 2 cards. He can probably play those 2 cards with enough resource. He has enough resources to do it. So every single turn, he's playing 2 or more characters, it feels like, forcing Matthew to respond with significant removal and not single character removal.
And Matthew doing a great job as well, using this talkative puppet, the Pinocchio talkative puppet as best as he can, playing it and then bouncing it immediately with the the Madame Mim Fox so that he can challenge. And now he has that talkative puppet back in hand to do it again if he needs to answer a threat.
This is not the first time we've seen Rapunzel play for the lore alone. Rapunzel has a great ability allowing you to heal a character when it comes into play and drawing cards for each damage counter removed. But here being used purely as a lore generator, I believe, getting out on the board and threatening 2 lore next turn.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, Joshua is just doing a phenomenal job at putting just enough lore on board for it to matter, but not enough that Matthew feels great about his options. We do see a Meta Medusa being played by Matthew, which will banish a character with 3 strength or less, and he chooses the Rapunzel because the Rapunzel has 2 lore on it, the most lore out of any of the characters, just trying to slow Joshua down as much as possible, but Joshua just continues to chug along, going up to 13 lore currently.
Yep, and see, this is why that Rapunzel play was so big. Playing that character with 2 lore, forcing the Madame Medusa to respond to that, leaves the Rabbit in play, where I'm sure Matthew would have much rather removed that if left to his own devices, because Joshua now getting extra value out of that Rabbit, bouncing it to his hand, drawing a card, playing it again to draw a card, and giving him even more characters at his disposal to flood the board.
Yeah, and now it's getting really dangerous. Being able to bounce and replay the Rabbit, like you mentioned, drawing cards, getting a Piglet on board that will have +2 lore because there are 2 other characters on board. Right now, we're looking at a total of 6 lore in play on Joshua's side of the board. And we see Matthew using that talkative puppet again to exert the Piglet that I'm sure he's planning to challenge. Oh, okay, so we see the Yzma being played on Matthew's own talkative
First time.
Pinocchio talkative puppet. He knows that the talkative puppet has done a lot of work this game. It doesn't need to be banished. This is a play that allows Matthew to draw 2 more cards, maybe bringing him closer to answers that he needs, while making sure that Pinocchio doesn't go into his discard, so that hopefully he can draw into it again when he needs it to continue to slow Joshua down with the characters that he's playing.
Yeah, Yzma is a very versatile card. We've seen it work into a variety of lists here once Into the Inklands came out. It serves as card draw for you. It also serves as removal. So in a pinch, you can remove something of your opponent's, perhaps a Chernabog, send it back into your opponent's deck, but allowing them to draw 2 cards. But I think it's most often used for card draw, because not only does it give you 2 cards, but it also now has 2 lore, and it's a card you can use to drive your lore total a little bit.
Man, the rabbits just do not stop. We see Joshua using one of his Merlin rabbits to banish the Madame Medusa and just playing another rabbit to draw another card. We see another Piglet in play as well. This is just forcing Matthew to answer again, saying, you have to answer my board, otherwise I win next turn, because now I have... Yeah, now still just 6 lore on board, 7 lore on board currently, which will be plenty enough to get to 20 on the next turn. If Matthew can't answer, Matthew can't challenge the Pascal because Pascal has evasive. All other characters on Joshua's side of the board are readied, so Matthew's not going to be able to challenge them. I really think Matthew just has to have a Be Prepared here. Joshua deciding to quest with Madame M. Fox, knowing that if Matthew does challenge the Madame M. Fox with the Yzma, it will also banish the Yzma, meaning that the Yzma won't be able to banish or challenge or banish any of the other characters either.
No, this is a difficult situation. As we mentioned, most of the removal in Ruby is spot removal, allowing you to remove a single target or single character. So another be prepared. Again, we always talk about how important it is, but again, another be prepared would be nice. We'll see if Matthew's able to find it. He is.
He does have to be prepared to save him and keep this game going. Liam, this is such a tight game for the championship. I'm on the edge of my seat. Matthew finding the answers he needs when he needs them. Even though Joshua is really close, I feel like this game still isn't over for Matthew.
No, definitely still in play, but Joshua with 2 great answers here. The rabbit, of course, getting a card is always nice. You can quest for that rabbit next turn to get you a lure, but the Mufasa is a really rough card for Matthew to see played here. It has 2 lure, it can quest next turn, but again, it's going to replace itself if Matthew manages to remove it. Maui coming into play with Rush, but nothing exerted, so nothing able to be challenged there.
Yeah, I really like this Mufasa play from Joshua. It makes it so that even if Matthew's able to banish it, there's just another character that's going to have lore that's going to come on board. And we see Joshua playing quite a few characters out, saying, Matthew, you have to answer all of these. If not, I will win next turn. And there we have it.
Wow.
We have a Disney Lorcana Challenge champion.
The very first in North America. Wow. And coming out of nowhere, this is a list I didn't see coming, and
I don't think anybody did.
And what a joy to see it take the first North American Lorcana Championship.
Yeah, absolutely. Congrats to Joshua Paultre there on his run, fighting just about 2,000 players to get to this point, being super innovative with his deck list in a meta that was already super diverse. I feel like this is just honestly the perfect way to finish off this set 3. Send off the third set.
I agree. Congratulations, Joshua. Congratulations to Matthew for a second place finish. And congratulations to all the top finishers, including the top 8. And we're going to take you right now to a video ceremony where everybody's going to get their award and then an interview with the winner.
Hey everybody, one last time from the floor. I'm joined with our champion here, Josh Paul. Hey, congratulations.
Thank you.
Grueling weekend, tons of rounds. You're our champion. I wanted to ask, coming into this weekend, did you think that this was a possibility?
I definitely did not. It was like, the furthest thing from my mind. Like, you just go and have fun. I would have expected, oh yeah, you lose out, whatever. Like, just, it's unimaginable to think that I'm standing right here right now. And like I said, I thanked them earlier, but my friends, my family, I love them so much. Thank you guys, all of you. It's incredible to be here. I wouldn't be here without them. And yeah, it's overwhelming sensation. I screamed out, oh my gosh, as soon as the match was over. I couldn't believe it, and I'm still in shock. I don't know, how I'll process the rest of the day, but it's going to be a great one. So
a lot of emotions to go through, I'm sure, as well. Let's talk a little bit about the actual tournament itself. You had a cool deck choice. We haven't seen a lot of Mufasa in some of these spots and like that. It just seemed amazing every time that we saw it. What led you to your deck choice, and do you regret anything about your deck? Do you think it's kind of perfect for what it was?
So it's hard to always say like a deck is perfect. I never believe that it's perfect. There's definitely modifications that could have been made and probably some changes that would have been more optimal. However, I was very happy with it. Obviously, I wouldn't have changed it at that moment in time. There was nothing to foresee it, but I loved the way it played out. I loved Fairy Godmother. I felt it was a card that just kept people off guard, and they just weren't ready for it. It was something unique and special, and that way they didn't know really the ratios, obviously, until you get to the top 64 and they get to look at your deck list. But sometimes you also get lucky too. That Mufasa slamming down some great stuff always feels great. Obviously, you have some hits, you have some misses. I missed out on a couple mims too that just banished themselves after Be Prepared. But for the most part, I couldn't complain. They were lucky and fantastic. It's such a cool card, so thematic too. Like after it passes, you get another thing. It's just brilliant card design too. The art, the way that the characters from the movies represent themselves in this game is just phenomenal. I loved Perdita. I think that just a 1 for 2 every time you get to play her, bringing back those stuff. It was just insane. So yeah, very excited.
I can tell that you're excited, and you know what? Look, I'm going to let you go with your friends. We had them. We were trying to keep them off stage here. They were trying to rush the stage and jump on us and yelling and screaming some "Let's go!" So I'm going to let you go celebrate with your friends. Once again, congratulations! You played amazing all weekend long.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
We'll see you in Chicago.